Donald Trump says America first does not mean America alone. He addressed business leaders at the World Economic Forum in Davos. But can the man who's promoted protectionist policies and scrapped trade deals convince the world the U.S. is open for business? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Richelle Carey. America First has long been one of the most common refrains of Donald Trump's administration. The U.S. president first used the phrase in his inauguration speech, and he's repeated it over the past year in reference to political and economic policies. So it's no surprise that the phrase resurfaced in his speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos on Friday, but this time with a caveat.
America First does not mean America alone. When the United States grows, so does the world. American prosperity has created countless jobs all around the globe. We cannot have free and open trade if some countries exploit the system at the expense of others. We support free trade, but it needs to be fair and it needs to be reciprocal.
President Trump insists many of the trade deals the U.S. has signed over the past decades are not reciprocal, and he plans to end that trend. Early in his presidency, Trump refused to back the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the trade deal negotiated by Barack Obama with 11 other countries in Latin America and East Asia. The other TPP countries went ahead with the deal without the U.S. Trump mentioned in his Davos speech that he may consider rejoining. The U.S. president has also threatened to withdraw from the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. And last week, Trump imposed new steep tariffs on imports of solar panels and washing machines. China, which makes many of those products, has criticized that decision. Let's bring in our guests now. Joining us in Suffolk in the UK is Pettifor, director of the UK-based think tank Prime Economics, which focuses on policy research and macroeconomics. In Beijing, Michele, Geraci, head of the China Economic Policy Research Program with Nottingham University. And in Zurich, Farha, economics analyst and assistant professor at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. And welcome to all of you. Mark, I want to start with you because I understand that you have just returned from Davos. So how would you say U.S. President Donald Trump's speech was received there?
Well, I think it was received more positively than expected, anticipated initially. Of course, there's a lot of antipathy towards Donald Trump amongst some of the quote-unquote economic elites of this world and liberal elites. But on the other hand, the economy in the U.S. and the tax cuts have been a boost to the economy. And so the economic, balance sheet right now looks pretty good for report card, looks pretty good for Donald Trump. And he has thus won some favor, in fact, despite some, reservations towards him as a personality here and there.
Is it a bit soon, though, to know for sure what the impact of the tax cuts is going to be?
Well, I think as Donald Trump himself said, in fact, the impact has already been seen because people have already figured in the valuations of companies, et cetera, that these tax cuts will be a boost to earnings. And we're seeing now, in fact, is a sort of a bubble, a big, fat, ugly bubble, as Donald Trump said about the Obama administration stock market. It's gotten even bigger right now. And it remains to be seen whether this is sustainable growth or whether, in fact, there might be some sort of a crash in the offing, because it is inflated right now, despite all the hype.
Okay. Same question to you, Michele. What did you hear about how Donald Trump was about how his speech was received at Davos compared to expectations?
Compared to expectation, better. I think there was, in a way, the novelty was twofold. One is that he is continuing to do and try to do what he said during the electoral campaign last year he was promising to do. So in a way, it's a rare situation around the world where we have a political leader that anyway sticks to what he said during campaign, whether we like it or not. That's quite unusual. Clearly here the message was implicitly directed at China because Trump changed a little bit the rhetoric of his approach. He said we are open to trade with any partner, America first, of course, but we are part of the world unless someone is not going to work according to fair and equal rules and reciprocity. And of course, this is a message that is directed to China and other countries that he may perceive do things with maybe exchange rate, with labor law situations, salaries, and so on, and in a way dumping, although the word dumping was not specifically mentioned. Trump wants equal trade on fair terms, on reciprocal terms with the rest of the world, and clearly this is going to be a sore point in the US-China relationship that we can then address later on. But this is the key message.
You are right. In fact, we will
people here in Beijing.
You are right. We will come back to talk about China more in just a moment. Firstly, I want to bring Anne into the conversation. So, Anne, when Donald Trump says America first, it sounds like a great campaign slogan. What does America first actually mean policy-wise? Has he truly articulated that?
Well, yes, I think, as your other contributors just said, he does say what he means, and he has done what he meant to do. In other words, he is promoting protectionism. You know, it extends from building a wall in Mexico to blocking or raising tariffs on washing machines and solar panels from South Korea and so on. So in that sense, he's not moved from his agenda. But what he's, in my view, not saying is that actually America has a massive current account and trade deficit, and so is really dependent on some of those billionaires moving their funds into the US. You know, America first here is an assumption that America can go it alone, but it can't actually. You know, it is heavily dependent on the rest of the world for the rest of the world's savings in order to enable Americans to carry on consuming in the way that they do.
In fact, when you say protectionism, an analyst with CNBC specifically said that this is a quote, I think in 2018, one of the biggest risks we face is the Trump administration moving from rhetoric into real policy, a real protectionist policy, saying that he thinks it's a risk and a bad thing. Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, it's all true, but of course the US is still the preeminent economy, and as we saw in Davos as well, when Trump met with the European executives, they're still very intent on investing in the United States, especially of course with these tax cuts now. So it's not quite that clear that it will, you know, just be a return to mercantilism or to protectionism, pure and simple. And of course that's a global trend to some degree as well, this whole trend to sort of safeguard borders, etc. But because by dint of the US being such a powerful and important economy, most states or companies will not be able to sort of easily say no to the US. That having been said, the dollar has suffered a lot. Even this week we saw that again. And or even before Trump, in fact, people have been pulling out some of the money out of US treasuries. Some of the states have. So that is a whole different part of the equation as well. What's the future of the dollar and the dollar policy of the United States as well, as Steve Mnuchin indicated, and then Trump refuted subsequently. I think that's a big issue as well on the table.
Actually, that is a good point. How important is messaging? Donald Trump has been very unpredictable about a lot of his policies, right? He'll say one thing one day, he'll tweet something another day, someone in his cabinet says something another day. How important is his messaging when it comes to trying to renegotiate any of these deals? And I would like, Mark, I'll start with you, and then I want the others to join in on that as well.
Well, I think if you read The Art of the Deal, you see this is always a strategy of Trump to be ambiguous in his dealings with the other party, to say one thing on one day and another thing the next day, to threaten somebody and then to pull back. And we see. But
how is that a negotiating tactic? How can you negotiate with someone that if you don't think you're doing so in good faith?
Well, I mean, that's his strategy, right? He says that in The Art of the Deal. He did that with the Chinese too. He threatens them one day and then he pulls back the next day and tries to exact concessions by antagonizing the other party in the first instance and then relenting in the second. I mean, that's a strategy. Sometimes it works, sometimes it might be dangerous in political situations, but you know, it remains to be seen where it goes. But he has a lot of trump cards, so to speak, in his hand still, despite the U.S. losing market share and the global economy moving.
You had to say Trump card. Somebody was going to have to say Trump card today, so it got to be you, Mark. Michele, so I'd like your thoughts as well. The fact that this has been one of the criticisms of Donald Trump's foreign policy. He'll say one thing, a Secretary of State says something else. When it comes to particularly economic policy, how important is it rather for the messaging to be consistent for other countries to know where the U.S. stands, what they mean, what it is they want?
Well, there has been some changes of rhetoric, but I think the fundamental and underlying principle of Trump's policy really hasn't changed. Maybe we analysts, the media have reported in different ways, but when you hear him directly from his mouth, as we did today in Davos, his message has been clear and, in a way, I dare to say, consistent. Trump is not a protectionist. We do tend to say, oh, Trump is a protectionist, but he's not. He is protecting some sub-sectors of the U.S. economy, and only for a limited period of time. So he's, in a way, I would call him a target protectionist of certain sectors, of certain segments of the economy. Now, the different thing between being protectionist and not, even ideologically, is that people who believe in free market, they tend to believe in free market full stop, always at any cost. People who may tend to be believing in the protectionism, they never say we close our door entirely, we never sell anything, we never buy anything from other countries. They always mean, I think that's what most people think, we do selected protectionism. So we are here in a bit of an imbalance. Liberalism means open 100%. Protectionism never means close 100%. And so if Trump puts some 30% tariffs on washing machines, on solar panels, or anything imported from China, that does not make him a protectionist per se. He's just trying to protect those sectors of the economy. And the thing that has not been reported is that those tariffs will taper off down to 0% in the next few years. So he hasn't said 30% forever, but that's what the public believes, because public only reads the first sentence of what we say and what we report.
Okay,
he said we're going to do 30% now and then going down to 0 in the next few years.
Okay. Anne, did you want to get in on that?
Yeah, but that's the problem, you know. Trump's messaging is chaotic, let's face it. As we all know, when he travels abroad, he tends to read his speeches written by his advisors. That was the case yesterday in Davos. But on the whole, the messaging, both on trade policy but also on foreign policy, is chaotic. And the danger of that, and I agree that he doesn't often mean what he says, and that actually it's not protectionism, full-blown protectionism. But the problem with the chaotic nature of the messaging is that it raises tensions. It raises trade tensions around the world and political tensions around the world, which create financial tensions and which could trigger an accident of some kind or another. So this is what is so dangerous about, you know, the haphazard way in which he does communicate, the chaotic way in which the White House communicates with the rest of the world. So I'm not complacent about this, and I don't think we should be complacent. I think he is quite dangerous to the functioning of the global economy, and that's because of his nationalistic and protectionist instincts. But having said that, I mean, he's not really addressing the real problem. The real problem isn't trade. The real problem are financial flows and the determination, for example, of the value of the dollar by markets. Now, he has, and Mnuchin has no control over that, they claim. But the fact of the matter is that the dollar has been overvalued. It was overvalued in 2014. And that partly explains the election of Trump, because that hurt the American economy. But Trump and all of his advisors are in favor of not doing anything about managing and stabilizing the global economy. They're in favor of the global economy being managed by invisible capital markets, invisible to us and unaccountable to us, and responsible for volatility of currencies, of trade, and of financial flows. They're not prepared to do anything about that. They're only prepared to, as I say, engage in this chaotic messaging, which just raises political and trade and financial tensions.
Mark, do you agree with that analysis from Anne?
Yes, and I would go further than that. I think maybe the root problem of the global economy is financialization. So we've had, the crisis in 2008, which was solved by more liquidity, quantitative easing, and a competitive devaluation. I don't know if the dollar is too high or too low, because everybody is printing like crazy, and everybody is engaging in debt after debt after debt, So that, I think, has not been solved by Trump, despite his campaign rhetoric to go against, the Wall Street fat cats. He's, in fact, employed people from Goldman Sachs and others. He's not gone against special interests, neither there nor in the foreign policy, nor with Israel, with the Israel lobby, nor with the financial lobby, nor with the arms lobby. So on all three fronts, Trump, in fact, betrayed his campaign promises. And the financial problems go beyond Trump, I think, in the United States, with inequality and financialization and in the whole world. I think that's something that was there before, and it's only been exacerbated now. So it's still not been solved, and we're waiting for this next bubble, in a sense, to pop. So we'll see when that happens.
You mentioned Goldman Sachs, which would obviously have to come up in a conversation like this. Actually, Lloyd Blankfein, CEO of Goldman Sachs, tweeted this after Trump's speech yesterday. He said, "Give Trump credit for campaigning where there are no electoral votes. His message at Davos, promoting America's interests, doesn't mean withdrawing from the world." Agreed. Now, can we stick with international commitments on environment, trade, and defense? So there's actually currently, according to the World Trade Organization, 35 new bilateral and regional trade pacts that are under consideration. The U.S. is only in on one of them. So the world is moving forward, regardless of the new positioning that Donald Trump is trying to get for the U.S. Can you just jump in and out of these agreements when you want to, Michele?
No, you cannot, but as a new president, you can stop, let's say, undo everything that was done before if you don't agree with those policies, and then start re-examining one by one. Of course, other countries have the inertia from previous policies that may have not changed in the last year. But Trump, I think, approach is whatever was done before could be wrong. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So let's stop it, let's review it, and then let's reconsider if we want to carry on with those agreements or not. He has said what I call it a temporary no to everything, to all agreements, climate, trade, and so on. And then over time, he will cherry pick those that are in the interest of the U.S., or what he perceives are the interests of the U.S. In my mind, Trump's approach is very clear. We may not agree, or we may not like it. He feels like a CEO of a company. He has a judiciary obligation to his shareholders to make them richer. And in this case, as President of the United States, his fiduciary obligation is to the citizen of the United States. And we do not say those same things about other European leaders that are tending and trending towards protectionism as well. It's just because maybe they approach with a different rhetoric, or they just get the support of certain ideological fringes. But he's doing what he feels he has to do.
Okay, and let me bring Anne into this.
I really want to disagree there that he is looking after his base. His base is going to be hurt by these trade protectionist measures. But who he is helping are the 1%. That's why Gary Cohn of Goldman Sachs, was the one that led him into Davos, and that's why
Gary Cohn did right. He wrote the speech.
Yeah. So the billionaires of Davos are going to do very well. The Koch brothers in the United States are going to do very well. I'm not so sure that he is looking after his base. And what worries me is that, having promised to look after the interests of his base, having pretended that protectionist of solar panels and washing machines is helping his base. When it does not happen that way, the revolt, the anger will be much greater than it was in the lead up to his election. But I agree that protectionism is now prevalent around the world. And it's not that politicians have suddenly turned bad. It's that the financial system has so harmed the interests of ordinary people that they're demanding of their politicians that they should be protected from these uncontrolled financial market forces.
Anne, I want to tap into. No, I'm going to tap into what you're saying right there. The people that go to Davos, the people that are in that room, do they have any sense of this type of anger and frustration that you're voicing that people have about the system?
I think they're smart enough to know that there is deep anger out there, but they're also rich enough to think they can build themselves a form of protection against it, or they can bribe their way through, or they can co-opt politicians to protect them as the anger rises. But I don't think they have the slightest idea, honestly, of how their attitudes, their neglect of, if you like, the interests of ordinary people is going to damage them ultimately. This is what happened in the 1930s. You know, people were asleep at the wheel as nationalists and fascists came to power. And they came to power because ordinary people were demanding to be protected from the uncontrolled market forces that were harming their job opportunities, their abilities of their children to go to university, their ability to find a roof over their heads, and so on. These were being destroyed by so-called market forces and by financial flows. And ordinary people demanded that the politicians protect them. And, you know, the ones that offered to protect tended to be the right-wing nationalist leaders, people like Hitler. So we have not learned from history, and certainly the billionaire class have not learned from history that, you know, free financial flows and uncontrolled management of the global economy can lead to a rise in nationalism and protectionism. And this ultimately hurts the 1%, never mind the rest of us.
Mark, I'm gonna give you the last word on this. Right now, NAFTA is still being renegotiated right now. Depending on how things go with NAFTA, do you think that could perhaps predict how further renegotiating of other pacts and trade deals can go? Do you think there's a lot riding on how NAFTA goes, how it turns out?
Well, yes, but, you know, NAFTA itself, the record is a little bit mixed there. Was it in the interest of the average U.S. worker? There's different studies on that, and Trump and his base, so to speak, thought so that this wasn't the case. And this goes for other, you know, bureaucracies, the EU being one, et cetera, the UN. So I agree with your previous guests on this danger of this stratification and the gap between rich and poor. But one also should see that this preceded Trump to some degree, and he's, in a sense, came on the heels of this polarization in society, in U.S. society. And it's true, though, that the policies he's pursuing now are not necessarily those that he promised, and in terms of serving his base. And they may, in fact, further entrench this financial oligarchy. And I think the financial system as a whole is kind of in jeopardy in the future. So we'll see if he manages to rein that in. If he doesn't, then I think it might be his undoing as well, especially since the stock market now is that it's, you know, in a complete bubble, only preceded by 1987, I think, in terms of the way the stocks have, you know, completely defied valuations of companies. So if a crash happens, then Lord help us in that sense. Okay, Mark, you will have the final word. This is a really good conversation. I appreciate all of you joining me today for this. And Pettifor, Michele Geraci, and Mark Farha. Thank you all. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime if you go to our website, aljazeera.com. Also, for further discussion, our Facebook page is very easy to find. It's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, there's always Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Richelle, Carey, and the entire team here. Bye for now.